Greetings, vinyl community, and welcome to VC Friday. Today I'll be talking about an album that gets a bad rap, and I'll be talking about how the criticisms are not entirely unjustified, but I think the album is a lot more exciting than it's cracked up to be. And that album is the second album by King Crimson, In the Wake of Poseidon, from 1970. And apologies for the lack of any samples from the record, but the King Crimson team is known to be very diligent about issuing takedowns for videos that make unauthorized use of their songs. To understand the circumstances behind the release of In the Wake of Poseidon and how it came to be in the form it is, we have to go back to the prehistory of King Crimson. King Crimson had evolved out of Giles, Giles, and Fripp, which consisted of the brothers Peter Giles on bass and vocals, Michael Giles on drums and vocals, and Robert Fripp on guitar. And Giles, Giles, and Fripp produced just the one album in 1968, The Cheerful Insanity of Giles, Giles, and Fripp, which consisted mostly of quirky and whimsical pop songs that had more in common with the likes of the Bonzo Dog Doodah Band than with what would become King Crimson. And the album flopped mightily. So the band decided that what they needed was a strong lead singer, something they certainly didn't really have. And they answered an ad from Judy Dybel, who had recently quit Fairport Convention and was looking for a bass player and guitarist. She arrived with her boyfriend, multi-instrumentalist Ian MacDonald, not to be confused with Judy Dybel's bandmate in Fairport Convention, Ian MacDonald, who later changed his name to Ian Matthews. But the pair of them joined Giles, Giles, and Fripp. And they made a clutch of home demos, which included a version of I Talk to the Wind, which would later be re-recorded for King Crimson's first album. But Judy Dybel split when she broke up her personal relationship with Ian MacDonald. So, still needing a lead singer, they recruited Robert Fripp's old friend Greg Lake. And for good measure, Ian MacDonald called in his old friend Peter Sinfield to be the band's road manager and lyricist. Now, since Greg Lake was also a guitar player, Robert Fripp decided that he would propose to the band that Greg Lake would either replace himself on guitar or would replace Peter Giles on bass. This led to Peter Giles leaving, and the band was obviously no longer Giles, Giles, and Fripp. So now the initial King Crimson lineup of Robert Fripp on guitar, Ian MacDonald on woodwinds, keyboards, and guitar, Greg Lake on bass and vocals, and Michael Giles on drums, as well as Pete Sinfield providing lyrics and other services for the band. This lineup was complete, and they produced the debut King Crimson album, In the Court of the Crimson King. The album was a success, released in October of 1969. However, the stress of international touring proved too much for MacDonald and Giles, and they announced during the American leg of the band's tour that they were quitting the group. Greg Lake was asked to continue on, but he felt that it would no longer be King Crimson without MacDonald and Giles. So he handed in his notice as well, and Fripp and Sinfield were left holding the bag. Meanwhile, the band's management was pressuring them to record a quick follow-up to the successful In the Court of the Crimson King. So Fripp and Sinfield set about assembling a new lineup of King Crimson. Fripp called the Giles brothers and persuaded them to act as the rhythm section for the new album, thus reuniting Giles, Giles, and Fripp. Crimson's management arranged for an up-and-coming young singer-songwriter named Elton John to audition for the lead vocal slot, but after listening to the Empty Sky album, Fripp decided that Elton wasn't suitable for King Crimson, and he canceled the audition. Elton did get his session fee, though. Finally, Greg Lake, who was already planning to join forces with Keith Emerson once Emerson's duties with the Nice were finished, agreed to sing on the album in return for the PA that the band had used on their tour. So the recording sessions for In the Wake of Poseidon got underway with really only a tentative band in place. During the course of the recording sessions, avant-garde jazzman Keith Tippett was recruited to play piano, and Mel Collins from the band Circus was brought in to fill the void left by Ian MacDonald's flute and saxophones. With the management and the record company breathing down their necks for a quick follow-up to the debut album, Fripp and Sinfield had little time to write new material, so most of the album consists of pre-existing material being recycled or reworked in one way or another. The album was released in May 1970 on Island in the UK and Atlantic in the USA. And the cover art was by a Dutch painter, philosopher, and mystic Tammo de Jong. De Jong had created a series of paintings called The 12 Faces of Humankind, originally for Richard Gardner's 1969 book, The Purpose of Love. De Jong drew on the works of Carl Jung, the tarot, and the classical elements of air, fire, earth, and water to devise 12 archetypes of human consciousness. For the album cover, de Jong reworked the 12 paintings, or assembled the 12 paintings, into a single panorama titled 12 Archetypes. And you can actually see a rectangle around each of the 12 faces, indicating where the original painting's limits are. The album's inner spread featured swirls of blue and green created by Pete Sinfield, overlaid with lyrics and credits printed in almost illegible silver ink. All of the music is credited to Robert Fripp, except for co-writing credits for Ian MacDonald on Cat Food and Murday Morn. All lyrics are by Pete Sinfield. The album was released in May 1970 and rose to number 4 in the UK charts, number 31 in America. Greg Lake's unaccompanied voice opens the album with a soft, simple pentatonic melody swathed in reverb that gradually evaporates, leaving the final words sounding naked and fragile. After the song itself, which lasts only 40 seconds or so, a few random-sounding guitar notes drift past, marking time until the cataclysm hits. Extreme dynamic contrasts have always been a hallmark of King Crimson, and just as the first album had lured the listener into straining to hear the faint wind sounds before sucker-punching the ear with the entry of the full band on 21st Century Schizoid Man, the opening riff of Pictures of a City serves the same purpose, abruptly smashing into being after the delicate atmospheres of peace. The bludgeoning intro resolves into a gritty, slow swing riff swaggering through a blues progression like the theme from some imaginary 60s crime show, orchestrated with overdubbed layers of guitar and saxophone. Sinfield's lyrics are sparse chains of mostly single-syllable images, spat out by Greg Lake, joined by a fiendish-sounding mellotron. After two verses alternating with cycles of the blues riff, A series of rising shrieks from Fripp's guitar leads into the instrumental 40-second treadmill section. It was actually for purposes of maximizing their royalties that the band had this tendency to include subtitles in their songs, and that's something that happened through the early days, and often these subtitles get left off of some later editions. But 40-second at treadmill here refers to the instrumental break where the band storms through a series of twisting, rapid-fire themes before dropping suddenly into a hushed, spooky jam. And a gradual build-up leads to a reprise of the main song part and a final pile-up, all flashing lights and twisted metal. Most of the musical material for Pictures of a City derives from a lengthy multi-part suite titled Trees, which was performed only once or twice just before the original band left for the American leg of its tour. And this song exists only as an extremely poor quality live recording. Upon arriving in the USA, parts of the middle section of Trees were reworked into a song depicting the band's reaction to New York City. This was originally called A Man, a City, and became a staple part of the live repertoire before crystallizing into Pictures of a City as it appears on the album. Contrast being the name of the game, the savagery of Pictures of a City is followed by something sweet, flowery, and major key. Fripp's acoustic guitar arpeggios, Tippett's rippling piano, and Collins's pastoral flute provide a setting for Sinfield's lyrics full of veiled sexual imagery. Fripp even adds some tinkling celesta to the mix. All that's missing is Greg Lake. Although Lake had recorded a rough vocal take, he had to leave the band in order to join Emerson, Lake and Palmer before the track was finished. So Fripp called on another old friend from back in Dorset, Gordon Haskell, to provide the final vocal. Haskell stuck around long enough to sing in the next incarnation of King Crimson, but that's another story, which I've told in another video. The track with Lake's guide vocal reveals that he really would have been a better fit for the song. Ian MacDonald had previously written a melody for these same lyrics, which he took with him when he left the band, and that melody was recycled as Flight of the Ibis on the MacDonald and Giles album. Robert Fripp's Mellotron provides a suitably oceanic ambience for the album's title track, In the Wake of Poseidon, a grandiose ballad with soaring Greg Lake vocals. Fripp also provides acoustic guitar and some strangely muffled piano, while Michael Giles shines throughout with endlessly creative flurries of drum fills, almost like some prog rock Keith Moon. Sinfield's lyrics are based on the 12 archetypes depicted on the cover, with 2 lines devoted to each character, and a refrain referring to the balance of the 4 elements from which de Jong derived his characters. Note that many vinyl and CD reissues of In the Wake of Poseidon cut this song short, shave about 30 seconds off of the long fade out. The full version runs 8 minutes 26 seconds. So anything less than that, you've been cheated. So the main criticism that gets leveled at In the Wake of Poseidon is that it's just a clone of the first album, In the Court of the Crimson King. And with regard to side 1 of the album, there is some justification to that. You can't say that there's really an analog to the piece opening. I think it's a real stretch to say that just because both albums open quietly and then slam into a loud, heavy riff, that peace is no more than the subtle wind sounds on In the Court. But Pictures of a City really does have a very similar structure to 21st Century Schizoid Man. However, I think that actually Pictures of a City is of more compositional interest. I think it's actually a more complex and involving piece, even though it may not have quite the uniqueness and power that 21st Century Schizoid Man had in 1969. Cadence and Cascade, again, the parallel is to I Talk to the Wind, and they're both light ballads prominently featuring the flute. And so, yeah, there's a certain degree of similarity there. And as for Epitaph and the title track from In the Wake of Poseidon, I'll see if I can get away with demonstrating just how close the musical links between those two pieces are. So here is the chord progression for In the Wake of Poseidon. That's E minor and D major, A minor and a B. Now here's the chord progression for Epitaph from the first album. E minor, D major, A minor, and a B. E minor and a D major, A minor, and a B. So it's the exact same chord progression. Those two songs are doing something quite different. When you've got, like, In the Wake of Poseidon opening with that F sharp note over the E minor chord, that's a note that disagrees with the chord. That's a color note. And then just one note away, the main melody of Epitaph, well, it actually starts with the B, but it goes to the G. So the G feels like the starting note. But both of those notes are notes of the chord of E minor, so they're more consonant with it. It's a different tactic, a different flavor, but definitely the same pedestal that they're built on. So yes, the parallels on side one are real, but I don't think that that's anything to make the album any less enjoyable. And as we proceed on to side two, things are totally different. And even though, yes, there's some free-form improvisation on both sides, but that's not enough to make one a clone of the other. I think the character and nature of the sides are completely different. Side 2 of In the Wake of Poseidon begins with an instrumental reprise of the song that opened side 1, this time performed as an acoustic guitar solo by Fripp. This version of piece gains a bridge that is derived from the unreleased Giles, Giles and Fripp song Passages of Time, a song which later would appear on the Bronsbury tape compilation. Now, I've seen it written that In the Court of the Crimson King displayed no sense of humor at all, and I don't agree with that. There were at least a couple of musical jokes on the album. I'm thinking of the quote of Surrey with the fringe on top in Moonchild, and the Dance of the Puppets sequence from the title track, but there was certainly nothing on that album like the knockabout fun of Cat Food. Keith Tippett's fingers scamper wildly over the keyboard, and Fripp scrubs out frisky jazz chords as Greg Lake barks out Sinfield's sardonic commentary on the contents of your local supermarket shelves. At one point, Lake spontaneously bursts into laughter, which is prompted by Fripp having dropped his trousers and mooned him through the window to the vocal booth. And incidentally, in case you're driving around and need to know this, if you moon somebody up against a pane of glass, that's called a pressed ham. The song was originally written by Ian MacDonald and Pete Sinfield while traveling on the American tour. Fripp revamped the music and was apparently planning to take full credit, but MacDonald put up a fight, so his name remains. A shortened version of Cat Food, minus the instrumental jam at the end, was released as a single, backed with the non-LP track Groon, which was a naughty stop-and-go jazz instrumental performed by Fripp and the Giles brothers. So yes, it was actually Giles and Fripp in the person of King Crimson. And the kitty on the sleeve is named Cinderella. A dual mellotron arrangement of Mars from Gustav Holst's The Planets was a staple of King Crimson's early live shows. The band was advised that the Holst estate was likely to refuse permission to put this out on record, so Fripp therefore tweaked the melody enough to evade any copyright problems while leaving the characteristic 5/4 beat of Mars intact, and this formed the basis of The Devil's Triangle. Now, as credited on the original LP, with all the subtitles intact, this was a suite in 4 parts. The Devil's Triangle itself fades up gradually from a prolonged silence and presents 3.5 minutes of the altered Holst piece before disappearing into a sonic black hole and giving way to Murday Morn. Now, Murday Morn is basically more of the same, but now overlaid with some stereo piano trickery from Keith Tippett and a bit of whistling feedback, presumably from Fripp. A short interlude of howling winds, such as what you might be hearing coming in from outside right now, and ticking sounds titled Hand of Skyron follows. Finally, Garden of Worm is the Holst piece again, but now in double time, building into a wild collage of music, sound effects, electric harpsichord, and even a snatch of the original recording of In the Court of the Crimson King. And as the cacophonous madness fades out, it segues into the album's final track. With the peace theme having opened the album and appeared at its center, it now brings the album to a close. Lake's voice and Fripp's guitar now join in harmony this time, until Lake recedes into the haze of reverb from which he emerged in the first version. So that is In the Wake of Poseidon. As I record this on Thursday, February 13th, it happens to be Judy Dybel's birthday. She would have been 76, so respect to Judy. Thank you very much for watching. Be well. I will talk with you again soon. Bye-bye for now.
Bollocks!